If you're a first-time home buyer looking at a new home in Canada, this video could be worth up to $50,000. But here's the problem. I reached out to a couple of builders about this, and both of them told me the same thing. They're still waiting for their lawyers to get back to them, which means right now, even the people building these homes don't fully know how this works yet. So what's actually going on here? And more importantly, what does this mean for you? Because on the surface, this sounds like a no-brainer. There's a new GST rebate for first-time buyers in Canada. And if you qualify, you could get back up to 100% of the GST. On a new home of up to $1 million, that's $50,000. And that is a game changer. But it's not that simple. But here's what most buyers believe. New construction is more expensive. Resale is more affordable. And for a long time, that was mostly true. So what happens? Most buyers don't even consider new construction. They write it off immediately. They don't run the numbers. They don't ask deeper questions. They just assume. They assume it doesn't make sense, and that is just an assumption. It's exactly where this gets interesting, though, because if the math changes, but the belief doesn't, that's where people make the wrong decision. Now, before we get into how this new rebate works, you have to understand what the old system looked like, because this is where everything starts to click. For years, Canada had a federal GST rebate on new homes, and on paper, it sounded pretty good. If you bought a new home under $350,000, you could get back up to 36% of the GST you paid, capped at $6,300. Between $350,000 and $450,000, that rebate slowly disappeared. And once you hit $450,000, well, it was zero, nada. It was gone. Now, here's where most people oversimplify it, though. Nationally, that program basically became irrelevant because very few homes were under $450,000 anymore. But here in Central Alberta, that wasn't entirely true. You could, and still can buy new construction in that $350,000 to $450,000 price range. It is 100% available. So the rebate didn't completely disappear here, but over the last few years, as prices increased, it did become less and less a factor. And that's the key point. The rules stayed the same, but the market didn't. So what happened? The rebate didn't go away. It just became less and less relevant. More and more new homes pushed above that threshold, which meant more and more buyers got nothing. So the program still existed, but in the real world, it stopped mattering. As a matter of fact, I haven't thought about it for quite a while. But here's the most part don't realize. In many cases, buyers didn't even feel that rebate. They didn't feel that rebate anyways, because when builders would structure their pricing, it would say GST included, rebate assigned back to builder, or something like that. So the buyer never actually saw that money. It was already built into the deal, which means for most people, the old system was either too small to matter or not even visible in the first place. Now, this is where everything should change, because the new rebate doesn't just tweak the system, it completely shifts the scale. And when I started talking to builders about this, 4 big questions kept coming up. First question, number 1, who actually gets the rebate? Under the old system, this was straightforward. The rebate often went back to the builder. Now, that may not be the case. If the rebate flows to the buyer instead, that's a completely different dynamic. Now, the buyer pays the GST, applies after closing, and potentially gets that money back. Same tax, completely different impact. Second question, what does this actually mean in dollars? Let's walk through this properly. You're looking at 2 options here. Option 1, a resale home at $500,000. No GST. What you see is what you pay. Option 2, new build at $500,000 plus GST. So right away, most buyers go, whoa, that's too expensive. It's $525,000. And that's exactly where the comparison stops. But under the new system, that's not a full price picture anymore, because if you qualify, that $25,000 back comes right back to you. So now the question becomes, are you comparing 500,000 to 525, or are you comparing 500,000 to 500,000? Because those are two completely different decisions. Third question, how do builders price homes now? Because this is where things are actively changing. Under the old model, pricing was predictable. Builders could include GST, assign the rebate to themselves, and price it accordingly. Pretty easy. Now, that may not work the same way. If the rebate flows to the buyer, builders lose that piece. So now they have to decide, do we keep pricing the same? Do we switch to plus GST? Do we increase the prices to compensate? And right now, there is no consistent answer. Different builders are handling this differently. And most, like I said before, are still trying to figure it out. I get it. So are we. Fourth question is, what do lenders do with this? Because this part no one's talking about. If a buyer pays GST at closing, the $500,000 example, and then gets that money back, the $25,000, how does the lender view that? Because lenders don't love buyers walking away from closing with cash. And right now, there isn't a clear answer. So when you zoom out, this is what's really happening. Rule changed, but the system actually hasn't caught up yet. When did it change? March 20th, 2026. Right now, builders are figuring it out. Lawyers are reviewing it. Lenders are catching up, and buyers don't even know it exists. And that gap is where the opportunity is. Let me give you a real world scenario. A buyer looks at new construction and then he sees the GST and immediately thinks, out of my budget. So they pivot to a resale, then buy something older. Maybe it needs work. Maybe it's less efficient. Maybe it's not exactly what they wanted, but it fits what they thought they could afford. See where I'm going with this? But what they didn't realize is that if they had understood this properly, they may have been able to buy new for effectively the same cost. That's the gap. No knowledge of the rebate, but understanding how it applies. And that is why this matters right now, because this window doesn't stay open forever. Once builders adjust pricing, once lenders clarify their position, once everyone starts talking about this, this will become normal. And when something becomes normal, the advantage disappears. So here's the takeaway. If you are a first-time buyer and you've been telling yourself that new construction is too expensive, you might be making that decision based on outdated information. But the reality is the math has changed. But here's the problem. Most people don't know how to apply this yet. Builders are still figuring it out. We've already talked about that. Lenders haven't clearly defined how they treat it. And a lot of realtors, they're not even bringing it up in their conversations. So what ends up happening? Buyers either overlook new construction completely or they compare it incorrectly and make a decision without seeing the full picture. And that's where this actually matters, because this isn't about rebate. This is about understanding. Once you have to know how to make the right decision with the right numbers. So if you're in that position right now, looking at new versus resale, trying to figure out what exactly makes sense for you, we've put together a simple breakdown that walks you through how the rebate works, how to factor it into your numbers, and how to compare new construction properly. Because once you see it clearly, the decision gets a lot easier. And if you want, send me a message that just says GST, and I'll send it over and walk you through it. Because in this market, the difference between guessing and understanding can be tens of thousands of dollars.